have to engage in such activity, you don't want to do it without knowing quite a lot about it.
Right.
I was going to actually ask a question about the flip of the rush to judgment, which is if if serious scientists at some point decide, and governments even decide at some point intervention is necessary, and you think about kind of the normal NIMBY writ large problem that we see in other environmental and other areas, is there any active preparation going on at this stage to kind of introduce? I mean, I realize the Royal Society and others have issued these, but I sort of suspect
well, there's a bunch of stuff going on. I mean, I spent the last 2 days at a workshop over at the Bipartisan Commission. I forget exactly what it's called.
National Energy.
Yeah, right.
Global Task Force on Geoengineering,
which has got a task force that it's putting together on this. In a couple of weeks, there's a 4 or 5 day event out at Asilomar to be trying to start some conversation on this. So there's a bunch of low-level things going on. There's this Royal Society event that I described. But, it's also politically reasonably touchy, I think. John Holdren quite appropriately noted that we should not completely take this off the table, and Seth Bornstein, of course, turned it into a big article implying that the administration was about to embark on this, which is not. So it's touchy. It is very pressworthy, so I'm not faulting either one of them in that case. But you can also understand why people might be a little reluctant to publicly argue that we need a research program. I don't think we need a big program at the moment. I think that some tens of millions of dollars spent appropriately through places like NSF and maybe NOAA and NASA at later stages would be entirely appropriate at this point. It really is the case that we're almost dead in the water with respect to serious research on this problem. About the only thing that's been done has been some computer modeling using general circulation models. And it is pretty clear that one will have to do some small-scale field stuff to really understand some of the technology. The other thing we ought to be doing is having some instrumented aircraft available, so if and when we get the next Mount Pinatubo, we're all set up to go and study in detail the processes involved.
Too many earthquakes, not enough volcanoes right now. Right.
Yeah, although my suspicion is if we had a volcano tomorrow, we wouldn't be in a position to do that.
I'm not urging it.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't we now actually invite the audience to join into this. We have microphones that we're going to pass around, and I would ask you to please speak directly into the microphone and state your name and affiliation. Mr. Topping.
My name is John Topping with the Climate Institute, and Mike McCracken, our chief scientist, and together with the Climate Response Fund is essentially organizing the Asilomar meeting, and the whole purpose of that is to really try to develop some guidelines that would be very useful, and both. I can't speak for exactly what will come out of it. There'll be about 150 experts from a number of countries there. But what's interesting, I think, on just on this issue is that there are a range of possibilities, some of which might be almost win-win. One idea that I've heard Russell cites, I think at Harvard, is essentially advance the idea of essentially microbubbles. Well, they may or may not work. If it works, what it does is presumably is to reduce evaporation, which is a huge problem in the reservoir. So it's a kind of win-win strategy, and conceivably it's a soft way of testing something that might work much more broadly. You also have in the Arctic, when we talk about runaway or rapid climate change, I think the greatest concern would be.
Can you hold the microphone up?
I'm sorry, would be melting, let's say, in in Greenland, or obviously the methane releases. Well, black carbon plays a very, very large role in some of that, and there's now efforts underway, an ANSI study that ultimately might result in an ISO standard that essentially is looking at perhaps the possibility of establishing a regional warming, global warming potential, looking at the Arctic. What happens in the Arctic, that a large part of the black carbon essentially comes from forest fires in Alaska, Canada, Siberia, open burning in Kazakhstan. Well, conceivably, better forestry practices are a way of addressing that. And then you get into the other issues, perhaps, rather than global geoengineering, what you might find if we get into the very difficult situations that we described, it might be that very localized regional geoengineering over affecting Greenland or affecting the Antarctic might be feasible. At the same time, you go with an aggressive mitigation strategy, and that's, I think that's perhaps one of the things that might be on the table, but they all have to be vetted.
There are quite a few parts to that question. Could I suggest one thing as a starting off is, a lot of this, I think, is a little bit inside baseball, and because there's some people in the audience who've been focused on this for a really long time, and some folks who are new to it. So maybe you can explain some of these things that John mentioned before we respond to it. Black carbon,
Let me just comment on the microbubbles idea.
Microbubbles, yeah. Can you explain what it is first?
Microbubbles are very tiny bubbles, sort of micro-scale bubbles that sustain themselves over very long periods of time at the right size in water. There's an issue of how much energy it takes to do it over a large scale, okay? But it's quite dramatic. And I think Russell Seitz is now making a local, not a global claim, that you can put them in lakes that are subject to evaporation. You can reduce the evaporation and have a beneficial local effect. I don't think and it's just at a laboratory basis so far, so I don't think he's ready to say, we're going to put microbubbles all over the ocean and solve the problem. If you did, though, it looks like it would have less consequence than the sulfates in the stratosphere. So one of the things that needs to be looked at is things that can be done either locally or globally that don't have dramatically bad side effects or very uncertain ones.
Granger, did you want to talk about black carbon, or there's a second
part?
No, I think
we should
keep going. Okay. Any other questions? Please.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Hogue with Chemical and Engineering News. I'd like for you all to talk a little bit about what you foresee as possible research by the U.S. government. I think there were a couple of agencies mentioned. I know that Chairman of the House Science and Technology Committee, Bart Gordon, is really hot for the Department of Energy to be involved in this, although that sounds more like carbon capture and sequestration rather than the kind of solar radiation management. Could you talk a little bit more about that and how you foresee the U.S. government's role in research?
Yeah, I think first that it probably is important that there be federally supported research. I'm troubled by the prospect of private venture people getting into this business because, among other things, suddenly there becomes then an incentive to do it. And on the one hand, I think it's terribly important that we understand what it would cost, how you would do it, what the intended and unintended consequences would be. I think that in the early stages, National Science Foundation might be actually quite a good venue because, they are in the business of exploring a wide range of issues, opportunity for multiple investigators with different perspectives, opportunity for folks to work on some of the social science issues. We've actually been, with some NSF money, doing some work in this space. And as I say, I don't think at this stage large amounts of money are needed. Later on, when you are actually trying to run some field